So much, just so much bureaucracy, so much ultrasounds, go to this facility, go out of state for this test. I mean, there's just surgeries and I want to say it's insane. Like it's insane. So I want to just name that for the queer and trans person who is listening or who is on the fence. Like it is massive, right? And the only thing that quells that, right, or calms that down for me is loving that child, thinking that it's for that child, right? And knowing that it's for whoever you're seeking to create to join your family. Like that's it.
I'm Keltie Maguire, and you're listening to the Kids Are Childfree podcast. Hello and welcome to the Kids Are Childfree podcast. All right, I have been sitting on this episode for the last several weeks, and it has just been killing me not to be able to share this with you. I had a sort of organizational burst of energy, I guess you could call it, as we headed into the summer, where I was able to get almost all of my conversations for the ensuing couple of months recorded. And when I had this conversation with today's guest, I was like, oh my God, I feel like I need to share this tomorrow. Alas, I have been patient and the time is here. Today, you're going to be hearing from our very first transgender parent. This person is exquisitely well-versed on all matters of spirituality, gender identity. There is so much that we cover. And I just have to say, I was so personally moved and inspired by our conversation, and I cannot wait to share it with you. Shawdeez, Ph.D., received their doctorate in UCLA's Department of Gender Studies. While at UCLA, they created and led courses on trans magic, queer and trans Muslim feminisms, and QT POC resistances, while simultaneously serving on the Trans Wellness Team, a collective of medical doctors and mental health providers working to provide gender-affirming healthcare to trans students across the UC system. Shawdeez's dissertation research explored how queer, trans, and non-binary individuals engage with the spiritual as a form of resilience, healing, and possibility. They are now a full-time public speaker, spiritual guide, and workshop facilitator, offering spiritually conscious spaces for queer and trans people to lean into their joys. All right. Well, today I am joined by Shawdeez, who I can just not wait for all of you to meet, and we're going to jump right in. Tell us what we need to know about you.
Ooh, yeah. Okay. What we need to know
That's a
about
lot,
me.
right?
Yeah.
What's relevant?
Yeah. Well, I'm shawndeez. I use he and they pronouns. And a little bit about me. I was born and raised in Southern California to two, Iranian immigrant parents. So I had an immigrant kind of first generation life experience. And yeah, I kind of grew up confused, queer, and gender nonconforming, didn't really have language or tools or examples of that. So a lot of repression and hiding in my youth and adolescence. And then, yeah, I went to undergrad, UC Berkeley. I studied peace studies. That was where I first started entertaining kind of, being queer. And then went to UCLA and got my Ph.D. in gender studies. And, that was where I realized that I was trans. I underwent my transition and just had a lot of epiphanies during 7 years of graduate school and graduate study. And during that time, me and my wife relocated, moved to Colorado, and decided to start a family. So yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Well, I always love when people share this kind of summary of their story, because there's, I'm sure, been many ins and outs. It sounds like it's been quite an experience of transformation and growth and change, and I'm sure many hardships are along the way. So I'm keen to hear whatever parts we can tackle.
Yeah.
Which, when I have these conversations with people, I really feel like I kind of wish I had 4 hours. I'm not sure if anyone else wants to listen to a 4-hour conversation between me and my guests, but we'll see what kind of ground we can cover. So, all right, I usually like to start this off by asking people, like, did you know you wanted to have kids? Or in the case of child-free people, did you know you didn't want to have kids? So can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Right. So as I said, I was growing up and I always knew that I was different and gender and queerness, and I didn't have any language for it. I didn't, like I said, have anyone modeling that for me. So when I was younger, the language is always, when you become a wife, when you become a mother, right? That was the expectation, right? And I was obviously just deeply averse to that. Whenever I heard that, I was like, no, 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 right? Absolutely not. So I always just assumed, right, because that was the rhetoric that was shared with me, that there was no way that I could have kids. There was no way that I could have a family like that. That was not at all possible for me. So in fact, actually, if you asked younger me, I would have said, hell no, right? No way, right? There's no way that I could have envision that for myself. And yeah, obviously now I realize it's because it was given to me. The option was only given to me as motherhood, right? As a birthing parent and as a mother. And that was not me. That was just not at all my life vision or experience. So it made it so that I never entertained having a child until I was like 28 years old, I think was the first time I actually
Okay.
seriously entertained it. Yeah. Well, yeah.
I think regardless of our gender identity, it's for a lot of us when it concerns parenthood, we think of it in the version of parenthood, whether it's motherhood, fatherhood, what have you, that has been shown and presented to us. And if
Right.
that didn't look good, feel good, if our experience of that wasn't good for whatever reason,
Right.
whether it's we grew up in purity culture and like it was this real idealized sort of traditional holier than thou mother figure, or whether, maybe we saw our father being just like the involvement or our relationship with them was challenging. I think it makes it hard to want something that our experience of has been either unappealing or that we don't personally identify with. And so I like how you frame that like, no, I didn't want it because the way it was shown to me, like that wasn't me. I didn't want that. So when did things start to change and shift for you? And when did this idea first become planted, if you will, that maybe you
Yeah.
could step into
Yeah.
parenthood?
Yeah. So basically I just led my whole life subconsciously assuming not gonna happen, not possible,
Yeah.
just not an option. And so just sealed shut, like thrown into the bottom of the ocean. And that was how I led my life through most of my 20s. And I think right when I was about, yeah, I think it was about 28 years old, I have a friend, a couple, and there's also a trans gal, his partner, and they had a baby. They did it. They went and like, did IVF. It was his egg. They retrieved his egg, and the partner carried the egg and birthed the baby, and they FaceTimed us from the hospital to show us the baby. And that was the first time in my life where I was like, whoa, like queer and trans people can make children and can create families. Like, even the whole pregnancy, they were pregnant. I was like, I don't know. It didn't go in. It didn't sink until I saw the newborn. And then it just changed my life. And I remember that day. I remember the day that baby was born. And me and my wife, the day was canceled. We just sat on the couch, just kind of like, I think just shaken, both of us. We were like, whoa. And then we were both like, whoa, like, do we want this? And it started this discussion,
Yeah.
and it was, yeah, that was the moment. There's actually one moment that I can point to, and that was it. That was precisely it. Yeah.
I like that there's a singular moment because a lot of the stories that I share and in the coaching work I do, I tell a lot of my clients, like, I can't say there's never going to be a light bulb moment, but for a lot of people, it's more like a slowly turning on the lights. It's like, oh, okay, I'm starting to see things more clearly. But some of us, we do have these really fundamental life-changing experiences. And the problem is we can't plan for them, right? It's like whether it's a birth or a death or some sort of awakening, we can't work that into this, like if we're trying to figure out if we want kids or not, but it can occur. And for you, that sounds like such a profound moment. And I'm interested, like, I mean, I'm getting an understanding of where you were at in your feelings, but what about your wife? What had her thoughts been? Like, was it a desire she had expressed, or had she had similar feelings about why this may not be possible or available?
Yeah. I think we both shared the sentiment that it was not possible for us. Like it was just not an option, which is bizarre when you think about it. It's like, why not? There's actually plenty of queer couples that pursue it. But I think we both just, whether it was our youth or, whatever, we were like, no, that's not possible right now. But then seeing the newborn in the delivery room via FaceTime, we were like, whoa, it did give us both a realization that, queer and trans people can actually create families. And I don't think until we saw that child, it felt actually possible, no matter
Yeah.
what, you hear or read, right? To see your friends have a baby and know the story and the history and the journey that they had to go through. Because,
Yeah,
for us, it's a little bit more work. And so that's
absolutely.
what opened that possibility for us. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm curious. I mean, sort of from where you stand, both from your own experience as well as conversations with and relationships with people in the queer and trans communities. Would you say the sense of it's not possible is because we've never seen that modeled, but because that's not acceptable or okay? Is it because it's not, there's the big how question. It's not as quote easy. Is it all of those things, or how do you understand why this? Because I've heard this before, like, oh, I didn't really see that as an option for me.
Right. Well, there's just the classic normative, like there has to be a mother and a father, so that subconscious
Yeah.
work and heteronormativity is forced on us. But on top of that, I'm thinking the world of IVF, the challenges of, like, if that's the journey that folks are going on, or if it's a job adoption, or if it's surrogacy, like it's a complicated journey, right? And I think choosing to not, is like, in some regards, an active preventative for further pain, if it is to be a long journey, a taxing journey, an expensive journey, a failed journey, or whatever, right? Like, I think there's lots of reasons to think that we can, but I think, when we did decide we wanted this, then it was like, okay, now there's like mountains that you have to climb to then do it, right? And then something had to ignite us to do that and to continue to do all of it, because it is not a short journey at all.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that word you use, ignite, it reminds me of a quote I love, which is everything you want is on the other side of fear. And while fear specifically may have been part of it, but I think, I think about the things that we want are often on the other side of these hardships, challenges, pain. And we do have to want it, I think, in order to like walk through the fire, if you will. And so are you able to speak to what some of those hurdles or that mountain was or
Yeah,
were?
yeah, for sure. Yeah, so we decided that we wanted to have a child, and so then the question became who, how, what, right? How are you going to do it, right? Um, and I don't know what it was about the time, the way the stars were lined up in the sky, but I just felt like, and we both did, like this deep, just like almost spiritually heightened awareness, right? That the child would be my egg, right? So I had to do an egg retrieval, and yeah, that's terrifying. As a trans masculine person, right? I have never been to the OBGYN in my life, never wanted to go to an OBGYN in my life, would literally have said I'd rather die than go to the OBGYN. I take the consequences. So for me, the reason I say it was a spiritually heightened moment was because I like lost all that fear. There was just a massive amount of relief going into what I would have considered the most terrifying doctor's office in the world. And I was able to, learn and, do the egg retrieval. It takes a few weeks. There's a lot to it. And to let the doctors do what they had to do and to get the eggs, out of my body, and, first step of creating, the embryo that then was able to be transferred into my partner later down the road, and get a pregnancy positive, and have the first baby. So yeah, that is a brief intro into what the journey looks like. Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure it was a lot, but also like how incredible it sounds like then. And I know, and of course, people listening, when you talked about failed, you use air quotes.
Oh,
I saw
right.
it.
Yes.
Similar, no, and that's okay. But similarly, I don't want to say like you had quote success the first time, but of course,
Right.
these are the words we use when we talk about this process.
Right.
But really, it does sound like, and something we're going to talk about more in this conversation is sort of, and frankly, it's something I'm surprised we haven't tabled more frequently, but this idea of like the spiritual journey of coming into parenthood. And it's something we've actually discussed with choosing the child-free path. But I think with whatever decision, we can regard this as a growth journey, a spiritual journey, a journey to connect with whatever our belief system looks like. Did it feel like, wow, really, like the universe, whatever you want to call it, God is guiding us through this and opening these doors for us? Or what was your experience of that like?
Absolutely. Actually, at the beginning of the journey of the egg retrieval, for the first, time we did this, it was like I felt cradled, like in some higher frequency, however you want to understand it, which I understand now is that was a temporary moment, but like it was something that I was experiencing, my wife was both experiencing, that really kind of propelled us in this direction, because there are a million reasons to walk away from IVF and there will
Yeah, I
always
bet.
be, but yeah, I think, there was just so much that had to be released, right? Like, I remember when I went to my mother, we were just started, we made the decision, we were like living in LA, I think. We were using UCLA facility, and I told her, like, we want to do this, we want to, she's going to kill me for saying this, but I was like, we want to do this. We want to do IVF. We're going to do this retrieval. We're going to try and make a baby. And she's like, don't do all that. She's like, you're going to get your hopes up. She was just like, don't do it. And I was like, I was like, Mom, what? I was like, don't say that. Um, but that was for her, I could see it was fear, right? It was preservation of
Yeah.
cost, loss, a non-successful journey, the exhaustion of IVF, all this stuff, but I thankfully have another relationship, my own relationship with the divine that was like, go your own way, trust yourself, trust what you're doing. And obviously now my mom's obsessed with my child. So there's that, but I think
Yeah.
what I saw in that moment was the choice to trust fear and rationale and to not go down a harder path, right? And I think also all of her own feelings, having a queer and trans child and like this super non-normative way of creating a family or whatever. But nonetheless, we knew that this child was coming,
Yeah.
right? And so we just went face first. It's hilarious because I did the egg retrieval, and the language that we were telling our friends and family was like, "Oh yeah, we'll see. Like we're just freezing eggs. Like we'll see." And then like we were pregnant. It was February we decided. In July we were pregnant. So it's a very quick, just movement, and we rode that wave. We had a lot of discussions. I remember in the beginning between the egg retrieval and the actual transfer of the embryo. Should we wait? Should we wait till we're more stable? Should we wait till we have more money, till we're older, till we're et cetera, right? All these other things that everyone's always dealing with or thinking about, right? And we were 28 when we got pregnant, 29 when the child was born. So it was very quick, right? Like super quick.
Yeah.
Baby was born. Our friend's baby was born. I went in and got my eggs retrieved probably a few months after that, and then we were pregnant a few months after that. But within that time frame, there was so much language in our discussions of being afraid, right? Of not being prepared enough. Are we old enough? Are we wise enough? Are we wealthy enough? Right? Are we whatever enough? And for some reason, me and my partner, we just kept sitting on the floor and drawing tarot cards on the rug, and all that we could come to was there will always be reasons to not. There will always be a voice telling you to not, but we have this in us, right? And in our hearts that is guiding us and like is helping us move forward and facilitate all this, right? And there was just something that was so clear to both of us, was so vivid, and we respected that. We trusted that we would be taken care of and that we were at the right place at the right time to make that choice. And so we did the transfer, and it worked, and the child was born in March. So yeah.
Wow. I the kind of confidence and assurance you have, and of course, like this is on the other side, right? How old is your child today?
She's a little over 2. Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, I just want to remind people listening, if you're feeling envious about, oh, I want to have this kind of certainty. I want the universe to conspire to tell me what I should do, right? Like, and I think there's something really beautiful and profound about what you're sharing because, and for a couple reasons. One is something we talk about a lot. And I think this decision of whether or not to have kids, a lot of it is being able to trust ourselves and how we're feeling and what it is we want. And I hear from a lot of people that they lack that. They feel disconnected from that. But beyond just trusting yourself, what I'm hearing is you have a trust or a connection with, you call it the divine. Is this, I'm curious about your framing of like, let me ask this. Is that something that had been in existence before this decision that you were able to like lean into? Or is that something that was cultivated through this process? Or has it been both?
Mm. Beautiful questions. Yeah. I call it divine, not to scare anyone, but I understand it as God. But I just use the word divine just to make sure that, folks, because there are folks that are rightfully so, have a lot of feelings about that word. But I absolutely, positively always had a strong relationship with God, with the divine. And I think basically what happened in this, beginning of the pregnancy journey was just like depth, right? The way that I understand it was like the layers that prevent us from being spiritually heightened were just removed, right? There was just some clarity. There was just some connection
Yeah.
that was made possible by a complete suspension of fear, right? And I realized it was temporary because what happened after, that kind of fizzled out. I was like, wait, I want that forever. Yeah, like I want that amount of clarity. I want that amount of confidence and awareness and connection, that lack of doubt, right? That, oh my God, it's so sacred. It was so comfortable. It was such a nice place where you just walk through life and you're just solid, right? And there are moments of that, there are pockets of that for sure. But yeah, for me, I think if I didn't have that, whether it was on my part or God handing it downward, whatever, I think there's no way that I would have personally been able to go to get my eggs retrieved. No way in hell I would have been able to go into a doctor, OB, and do that. So I think, that, yeah, something worked in that moment. Like I said, stars aligned for us, and, it worked out. Yeah.
You describing that, the confidence and the clarity and that connection and being in this like incredible space, it feels like a hug for my heart. Like just hearing you talk about it, I'm like, oh, feels so good, right? I think a lot of, maybe not all of us, I hope it's a lot of us, we have, like you say, moments of that. And just this, faith in whatever. Maybe it's not God or the divine. Maybe it's faith in just, I don't know, but I'm just going to be a little experimental and kind of play with like this idea that there is some force or forces that are supporting me. There's, conspiring towards good and my best, highest, whatever. Sometimes our best self doesn't feel like our best self, but like there's something there. And I think it's so hard to hold on to and be in continuously. But I suppose that's kind of the bigger aim of these practices.
Yeah, and the way that I understand having a child, my partner's actually, we're pregnant with the second, so it's
Really? I didn't
thinking,
know this. Oh my gosh. You
yeah,
heard it here
yeah,
first, friends.
yeah.
Congrats. So
Yeah,
exciting.
thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, yeah. I mean, the 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 way that I see having a child, the way that I've understood it now is it is nothing but a spiritual quest, right? Like you come to a point if you make that choice where you're like, wow, okay, like I'm now gonna have another being, right? That I'm, one, obviously, yes, responsible for, in charge of, feed, keep safe and warm and whatnot. But then it's just this eternal unfolding of your, you know what I would call the spiritual journey, right? Which to me is, all right, if we're here to learn how to love, right, which is, spoiler alert, what I think life is all about, then having a child is actually such a lifelong practice of that. That's actually what it is, right? And so it's, yeah, there's work and it's tiring and it's exhausting, but it's also like learning how to love on a different level, right? With like a younger you, right? It's yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of emotional work, but I think spiritually, me and my wife both signed up, for the task, and we've been doing it for a couple of years now. So yeah.
Wow. How
Yeah.
incredible. Okay, I want to go back a little bit to like the how, the execution of this whole
Yes.
journey, and not just specifically pertaining to you, but what I hear, specifically from queer couples, but let's say anyone who's considering parenthood who has things that make it difficult. And what I find is that if we're already unsure, so it's one thing to say I want this, and then of course it can still be totally exhausting and consuming to think about what are the steps I need to take or the decisions I need to make to get there. But when you're operating from a place of I don't even know if I want this, I'm 50-50, I'm torn, whatever. And I'm also simultaneously trying to think about, I can think about one couple I'm working with. Okay, do we want to have a child? Plus, would we do adoption? Would we do IUI? Would we do IVF? Would we do a known donor? Would we do a unknown donor? Like there's all these different decisions. And so that can feel like a lot of extra everything. How would you advise to someone to like navigate that path of all the things that would need to happen to have a child, especially if they're not even sure if they want a kid in the first place? And yet somehow that decision also feels contingent upon the how.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I get it, right? You listening to your list, I was like, oh my God, why would anyone why would anyone go down this path? Like when we began attempting the second pregnancy. My God. Oh yes, just so much bureaucracy, so much ultrasounds, go to this facility, go out of state for this test. I mean, there's just surgeries and it's, I want to say it's insane. Like it's insane. So I want to just name that for the queer and trans person who is listening or who is on the fence. Like it is massive, right? And the only thing that quells that, right? Or calms that down for me is loving that child, thinking that it's for that child, right? And knowing that it's for whoever you're seeking to create to join your family. Like that's it, right? Like if I sit here and think of the cost of all the drives of all, like absolutely, I'd put my head in the sand. I have one part of my brain where I'm like, if it's for the IVF, which in my mind, if it's for the baby, pay for it. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to talk about it because it hurts. It actually hurts to think of how much it costs for queer and trans couples to make babies. It's like,
Yeah.
wow, that's a lot I could have spent elsewhere. I could have been doing other stuff with, right? But the way that I've kind of held it is it's for the child, it's for my baby, right? And that's there's obviously that makes it easier for me to swallow. But yeah, I do want to acknowledge how many mountains it feels like you have to climb. And
Yeah.
I think the question is actually a question of hope and belief, right? And faith, right? And these words probably sound a lot more church based than, this question, but nonetheless, right? It's like if I didn't believe in what I'm doing, right, then it becomes a hell of a lot harder to, go back and do that again and drive out of state again and go, try this again and whatnot. So yeah, I think there's got to be some belief, some faith, like guides folks in that space, and trusting. I do trust God, right? So we did have like our first transfer. This second pregnancy didn't work, right? And that was a lot. That was an experience. That was a set of circumstances. Obviously, we didn't want, right? You do all this stuff and you spend all this time and you hope that it works, and like it didn't, and that was yeah, like we had to sit and make sense of that, right? It's like, oh, I'd love to be like, every time we tried an embryo transfer, it was successful. But no, that's not how life works. So we had to trust, um, you know, something bigger than us, even though we might not understand, and we don't understand what is going on Earth in Earth life, right? We just have our desires, we move in the ways that we want, and we do the best that we can, in pursuit of those desires. But I do ultimately trust that there's a larger being entity, right, that is guiding us, right? And so, we had to do another transfer and that one did work. And so my partner's now pregnant and, we'll never know what that was about or what that was to teach us about or whatnot. But yeah, I think there's no way out of that without trusting something bigger than ourselves because, oh yeah, then it gets real dark.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's just hard and shitty and bad, which is, the place a lot of people are in. So I really appreciate the message you're sharing with us.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm interested to hear how this decision and becoming a father and this journey of raising a child, like how that has both impacted you, in all realms and facets, but maybe just first start with how that's helped you perhaps step further into your identity. And
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah.
I just want to hear a little bit about, like, has that been sort of a vehicle for, I don't want to call it progress because that makes it sound a little bit trite, but what has that been for you?
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny that you asked that. Like I remember that when, the first baby, when she was born, it was the first night and mom was sleeping. I was holding the baby and it was like 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever. It was overnight and I just held her and I just was like, I just started weeping like by myself in the dark. Like I was crying and I was like, I can't believe it took me so long to realize that you were going to join us. That I was like, I can't believe how long it took me to realize I'm supposed to be a father, and obviously it was all about me. This baby is just like literally 3 hours old or
Yeah.
whatever. And so she's just in my lap. But it was such a moment for me because I didn't know that was coming. Obviously it's very emotional, the birth of your child, first child, right? But I think what I learned from that was, wow, like you were always destined to be a father. You just didn't know it because of the gender bit, right? And that whole language around how you're supposed to be a mother and a wife, and that was absolutely important to me, and I was never gonna fulfill that very well. So I think, actually having the baby, kind of solidified the way that I understand myself, right? Gender is one thing, but it's like, yeah, I feel more like a baba than I feel like anything else. And baba is how we say father in Farsi. So I think that, yeah, it's really done something to allow me to solidify how I understand myself. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It
Yeah.
sounds like it's allowed you to be you, like to really
Right.
feel
Right.
that full sense of yourself.
Right. Yeah. And that's such a beautiful word to me, baba, right? It's a word that for me encapsulates, someone who takes care, right, and provides, not just, obviously we can think classic, right, ways, but I mean like to love and to serve and to be there and to listen and to, show the world to the child. I think that to me is, yeah, the prompt to what it's about. At least at this stage, we're young, we're only two, so we're we're at a very different stage. But yeah.
So, if you've been listening to the Kids Are Child Free podcast, you might be thinking, wow, Keltie asks such good questions. Now, maybe you're not thinking that, but I have had multiple people say they really appreciate the questions that I ask the guests on the podcast. And if you would love for me to put my thinking cap on and to ask you thoughtful questions to help elicit connection with your own desires and help you figure out what it is you want when it comes to your kids or child-free decision, you're definitely going to want to check out my one-on-one coaching offers. I work with a select number of individuals each and every month to help them get clear on the choice that is right for them, whatever that may be. If you want details on how we can work together, you can head to kidsorchildfree.com. I will also link directly to the page where I have details on my one-on-one coaching work if you want to check that out. And if you're curious about how this all works and whether it's the right fit for you, you can also book a complimentary 30-minute call with me where we can talk about your unique situation, where you're struggling with this decision, and how I can help you in the form of one-on-one support. I'm interested in I guess to discuss gender norms, if you will, and for a couple of reasons. Now, with the cisgender heterosexual couples that I work with, there's a lot of discussion around, like, especially if I'm coaching and hearing from heterosexual women of like the expectations that fall onto mom in society. And even in the most, as I'm sure you know, as a gender studies PhD, like even the most balanced egalitarian modern feminist relationships, that balance of both labor as well as expectations can be very heavily weighted on the woman. Now, discussions, I think it's great to be having discussions, with your partner both beforehand and of course throughout, in terms of like what expectations and roles are. And I'm sure that evolves once a child or children arrive. It's not always what we expect or hope it to be, but I'm interested for you and your wife as a queer couple. Like, it sounds like both this identity for you as Baba and for her perhaps as mom, and like in a way there is that solidification of like being able to be that man that you are and that you are. And at the same time, I'm curious as a queer couple how there's maybe also been a questioning of gender norms. Like, I guess I'm wondering what that dance has been of like, I'm mom, you're dad, and yet it maybe doesn't look like the mom and dad I'd heard about or thought that I would be a part of on the other side of that equation.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Juicy question.
I'm glad it's hard to articulate, but I hope I got it kind of right there.
Yeah, no, you got it. Yeah, I'm sure it's a huge, question for folks as well, right? And yeah, I think, gender's huge, like it's a big deal. It shapes our entire social world, and it shapes more than that how we understand ourselves and who we are, right? So I think absolutely for cisgender and heterosexual people, it's a big discussion. It's a healthy discussion, and I absolutely positively encourage it so much. But yeah, thinking about ourselves and how we handled it, I think first there is a truth to, if there is in this in anyone's particular circumstance, one person births the baby and the other person does not, and there are really material circumstances to that, right? Like, like my partner breastfed the baby for 18 months and the baby never took a bottle. So that was like a lot, like that was very literal. And that was like, my wife's gone through a lot of awakenings and epiphanies since the baby's been born, but one of them was like, wow, like this child like actually needs me and my physical body like 24/7 for like this long. And like I was not needed in that way, right? So basically, at the beginning, right, I became do everything else person, right? And so I was doing everything else person, right? And then, I think what's really important when we think of gender norms and roles is, as you said, having discussions. I think what's more important than that, particularly when I'm thinking of heterosexual people, is
Yeah.
like queer consciousness invited me to be in more depth and awareness with myself, right? And so that's the cool part that can then, allow someone else into that. And we basically have to be, you know, I hate to use this, but like eternally vigilant about gender norms and how gender stereotypes are emerging in our lives because they do, right? Like I am the working parent, right? My partner is the stay at home and take care of kid parent, right? And so those things, it's easy to kind of lean into, oh, like, yeah, you grab that diaper, or like, oh, you worry about getting that, right? And so I think it's got to be some, like I said, eternal discussion, right, where we can always come to and revisit how we're feeling and what we're needing and what we're thinking, right? But when I think more practically of the way that I was raised in a very classic gender norm household, very traditional gender norms. And that deeply informed me, right? As a young person, I remember taking a class
Okay.
in college and like going and telling the professor, like, you know, my mom did every single thing in the home. My mom cooked all the food. My mom did all the laundry. My mom worked full time because of, new age feminism and what that gave women. So she's working full time. She's taking care of the kids. She's cooking all the food. And, my dad is working as well. Yes, like a normal father. But I was like, wait, and so in my youth, my dad, did everything outside the house. He did all the gardening outside, house care, whatever, handyman, fixed all the things that needed fixing. But it was very clear division of labor. And so for me, that was the way that I understood manhood and womanhood and fatherhood and motherhood, right? When I was like, I grew up and I was like, wait, because I was raised as a young woman and I was like, this seems unfair, like this just doesn't seem like a good deal. Why would anyone want this? So I think for me, obviously my experience with gender has been so different because I was, raised and socialized as a young woman, a masculine young woman into my 20s and then transitioned. And so I come to masculinity with obviously a different background and a different history, right?
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it's led me to be very concerned, very, very concerned with how patriarchy can sneak into everyday life, right? And so I think the advice that I would give, right, is how to create space for discussion around that, right? And to take that seriously, right? Because I'd hope, right? We don't want to reproduce that sort of violence, right? To make, women feel more responsible for the labor, right? The labor of the home, right? And then, having a child is a lot of work. It's just going to add so much work that you never
Yeah.
even knew, right? And so how do we, yeah, make room to discuss that, have the depth and awareness and vulnerability with ourselves to ask, am I, you know, am I being fair, right? Or am I allowing space for what is needed for my partner, right? Am I, and I think, I'll see different if you're different relationships, different partnerships, but it's really got me thinking about the, yeah, space to be, yeah, more honest with ourselves so that we can be better. Because ultimately what I am thinking about is you are parents to young people, right? And what you give is going
Yeah.
to be given to those young people, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about that because, of course, I mean, we've been sort of talking about our experience as parents, potential parents, but I want to talk about like the values in which you are raising your child and specifically as it
Yeah.
concerns gender norms and as a queer couple and like what both in terms of what you're modeling, but also what you're directly telling and teaching around gender and other ideas related to that. Do you think, yeah, are
Yeah.
important?
Whew. Yeah. It's a big question. It's a huge question. And I
Yeah.
take
We could
that
have a huge,
really,
like an episode just
yeah.
about that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I guess I should share this. I'm also a non-binary parent, right? So that does shape how I understand gender and my relationship with gender. So if that question is posed, right? I think for me, some of the greatest lessons that I offer my child, right? The way that I understand queerness and
Mhm.
transness, I think, everyone has definitions and understandings of those words, right? But for me, queerness and transness is most synonymous with freedom, right? So if I understand queerness and transness to be the pursuit of freedom in this life, right? Then for me, actually, the biggest task or the biggest wisdom, the biggest offering that I'm going to give my children is also the pursuit of being free for themselves, right? And I think the biggest one that comes to mind, right, is, we announced that we're pregnant and everyone's like, are you having a boy or a girl? And this makes me want to punch people in the face. Like a lot of
Yeah.
time makes me want to
Fair. I
punch
wanted to
people in
ask
the
about
face.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a great question. And so me and my partner, queer couple, is our first baby. We were like, we're not telling anybody. And we didn't tell anybody. And it was a disaster, right? And not because we didn't tell anybody. It was a disaster because there was compulsive questioning, and it was compulsive, right? And it was like, it was pissing us off, right? It was like, it was actually detracting from the pregnancy and the beauty of a pregnancy and the beauty
Yeah.
of creating life, right? Because where we sit, it's really nice to say, we're having a baby. Let's celebrate the birth of a new being. That would be really cool. But instead, it was like, is it a boy or is it a girl? And I think for me as a trans person, it just makes me really sad that that is such a defining characteristic of human life, because to me, I know that it's literally not, and I almost want to stand up and repeat that to my parents, my family,
I'm like, you can
like,
repeat it here, but
yes, yes, yeah. No, it's like, it's a child is born, right? A child is born and they have a body and that's it, right? And it sucks that we think that if we call them boy or we call them girl, that we know anything more about them. And I think at some point I came to the more compassionate place of, okay, yes, my mom is dying to know the sex of the baby so that she can have more to relate to this unborn fetus with, right? She wants to connect, right? But I think what also gets wrapped up in that is our assumptions of what is a boy and what is a girl, right? And our expectations and values and, fantasies of who this person's going to be. And
absolutely.
we don't do that to our child, right? So the way that we're raising our child is very, very open, right? I wouldn't be surprised if, well, I guess she might know that there is man and there is woman, but we don't use that language in the house. We don't use the gender binary in any way. We don't police it. We don't offer it. I've thrown out books that are super gendered and super binary that like kind of teach that boys are like this or girls are like this. That made me want to puke. So I immediately gave that to the thrift store, right? So there's just different ways that we are not instilling one cisgender identity that like you're born and so you're expected to be like, absolutely not. We're not teaching that child that, absolutely not. And then the heterosexuality, we're also not teaching that, right? Like, we're using language that allows the kid to know that you can obviously, when that time comes, you can like anyone, right? And you can, pursue that, right? But also, at this point, she dresses herself. You can wear whatever the hell you want. I don't care, right? You can, sometimes she wants to dress like Baba and sometimes she wants to dress like Mama. Sometimes she's wearing high heels and she's wearing a button up. It's hilarious. She can do whatever she wants. And I think that there's something very beautiful about not just the invitation for the child to be free, but it's the combination of the purity of a young being, right? And kind of
Absolutely.
untarnished, unsocialized human being, and to kind of foster this moment where they do feel most free, I think is super sacred. And so, yeah, I think, to return to that story that I was sharing a moment ago, we did announce the sex of the first child, and then I'd like written this like email that I was going to share with my family and kind of explain something. And while I had written it, it was a draft form. My, partner's water broke and we never were able to release it. And so like, we basically just shared pictures of the baby. And I remember that there was, hospital marker, a wristband on the baby and it said female. And so then everyone was like, oh, it's a girl. And it just pissed us off. It was actually sad because like this baby was born and it was so more important, but it was like the declaration of the child's sex was so paramount to the birth of the baby. And
Yeah.
that will never not piss me off or irk me or bother me as a trans person. And, likely probably queer folks too, right? Because, yeah, I just feel like it shrinks a being, right? Because I know the way that my family understands what it means to be a woman, and that's not an invitation to be free, right? Which sucks. Yeah, so that's hard. And so for us, I think we've been very diligent, very clear, very careful about who we are and what's important, right? And so, I think inviting the child to know that they are just a person, a body, and their goal is to be free and to explore this world and to find love and to be love. I think that's super different than like, take a cotillion course or whatever the hell it is that they teach, young women. So yeah, yeah,
I feel like if only every child could be so lucky to have that sort of way of
yeah,
thinking and being instilled upon them, right? Like, and I don't even want to say instilled upon them because it's like you're placing an idea, but this sort of openness, and yet like how much resistance there is, how much people have to and want to know. And I mean, we won't even talk about gender reveals, but like I think before we started recording, we had a brief aside. But yeah, it's so funny, like how many people you always hear, well, ever since they were little, they were really like a boy, they were really like a girl. And I remember all the way back to gender studies or gender psychology 100 back in university, like people are so unaware of like from the very beginning, as you said, before this beautiful human is even born, we already are putting assumptions onto them. And to think that has no influence and this is just the way someone is. I mean, of course, someone is the way they are, but that may not be the way that we
right,
view them to be. It often probably isn't. So,
right, right. And I think, the follow-up question that I get in trans community or queer community, or the follow-up question that I don't get that I should get that people are holding in their mind, right, is then why do you call your first child a girl, right? Which I
yeah,
I I,
I
I had
was
that same
curious, actually.
question.
Thank you for saying
Yeah.
it.
Yes. There you go. I had the same question when I was in this phase of deciding whether or not to have a child, and I did go to a talk by a couple of trans fathers. It was the only thing I'd ever seen in my life where trans fathers were on a panel as a virtual event, and I went. It was a very small event, very cool to see and hear from two trans fathers. And I remember I arrived with a similar judgment of like, if we are anti-gender binary, right? If we are
Mhm.
pro gender freedom and expansion for children, why would you call your child a girl? I remember I arrived with that same question for them, right? And I don't think I even had to mention it. Someone else brought it up, but basically what they told me was your child is going to live in the world. And I was like, what a thought. I was like, your child is going to live in the world, which
Yeah.
means they're going to go to the grocery store and the clerks are going to talk to them and the nurse is going to talk to them and the person at the drive-thru is going to talk to them. And to be ungendered as a child seems like so much weight because you would be bearing the brunt of gender confusion of every adult or every person that you encounter. That had not occurred to me, right? I'd only thought of it as a philosophical project of, oh, let's not gender a child, right? Let's let them be free. And it's like, but then, when you're walking down the street, like it could actually be an active conflict. Like it will be an active conflict if people don't know, right? And so what's funny is obviously when the child is young or if folks have little babies, you know, a lot of times they make the wrong assessment, right? They're like, oh, he's so cute. And, we would be like, yeah, thanks. And we just keep walking because it's not a big deal and it's not an affront, right? Or suddenly if they
And people
realize,
are like, oh, sorry.
right, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm like, no, like, no, we actually need to, this is healthy and normal for you to realize, it's like, I
Yeah.
want to give you a full gender studies course at this point, but I don't,
Yeah.
I
I
let
want
those
to
people
take it.
yeah. Yeah. But, I think I realized, oh, my child will have to experience the social world, right? And then the question became, as a parent, how do I facilitate the most ease for my kid? And it was like, oh, actually, it would be to let them be and inhabit one half of the gender binary at this point in their lives, right? And as we move forward, as she develops language, I think it's really important to let obviously the kid lead the way 100%. But I think for the ease for her to not take on the brunt of gender confusion of the world of adults that she encounters, I think that, yeah, we decided to let her be known as a girl at this point, right? And to obviously, you know that word means very little to us in this household, right? But nonetheless, hopefully it facilitates ease, like I said, when she's navigating, being at the park or whatever, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
This is, of course, one topic among so many when it comes to raising children. And it just makes me think, like, I wish that every child in this world had a parent that was so thoughtful, conscientious, intentional about whatever the matter is, right? I think it's such a rarity, and it's so refreshing to hear about and be discussing this with you. And yeah, again, I mean, go forth and multiply. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Keltie said
That's,
so.
that's funny.
Oh
What's on
gosh.
my part of that? That's funny.
You're like this
Yeah.
strange lady I
Yeah.
talked to.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
okay. So one thing I want to hear just a little bit about some of the work you do, and specifically pertaining to, I believe you call the work like it's about cultivating trans and queer joy, and like it's spirit on from a spiritual standpoint. And I mean, maybe you can first of all just tell us a little bit about that and sort of what this mission is amongst all of the. You do a bunch of different things professionally, which feel free to
Yeah.
elaborate on any.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I think that's actually a great question in this discussion because I call it joy consciousness, right? And for me, I did not really acquire that, right? I didn't discover it. I didn't find it until I was, like late 20s. And basically what I mean by that is before that point in my life, I had really ingested a lot of messages that I was not worth anything. I was not valuable. I was not precious. I was not important. I'm a trans person of color. I'm Iranian. I'm Muslim. There's a lot of bad
Yeah.
messages. There's not a lot of good juice out there for us or people like me, right? So I had really internalized that my life would suck, right? That my life would always be resistance or fighting or struggle or suffering, right? Those are the messages that were being circulated to me. And for me, joy consciousness is just this, yeah, you might call it a light bulb moment, but a huge paradigm shift where you realize, oh no, wait, I am precious. I am divine. I am worth whatever it is that I'm discussing, right? And obviously further down the road was like I can become a parent, right? And I am a parent now, and that's it gives me some chills because I certainly did not think that I was, right? And I basically I share that to say there's no way that I could envision becoming a parent until I realized my self-worth, right? I did not know that I could become a parent, and that makes sense, right? Until after I had to have this kind of epiphany and awakening, right? And for me, it was deeply spiritual, right? I had like, if anyone asked me, I had to leave the university, leave all my books, or went out into the woods, the mountains, and spent the summer as far away from my books and phone and computer, and I really had to, get real existential with myself, right? Like, why are we here? What are we doing? That type of thing, right? And I came out of it realizing that I am actually also a creation of the divine, right? And I deserve that joy that I did not know that people like me could access or let alone deserve, right? And so that really paved the way for me kind of creating a life that I consider beautiful, that is a life that is delightful, that is something to pursue. And now me and my wife live in Colorado. We have our little colorful home with our garden, and we've now added one, and we're going to add another baby to it. And it's actually like really crazy to think about the fact that we've created such a beautiful life. And for me, that came out of joy consciousness, right? Realizing that I can actually create joy and have joy, and I can do that. I never would have believed that. So that was a huge shift, and now I do that work with other queer and trans folks, and hold some groups, different workshops, of the similar idea, right? There's Queer Bliss, which is a space for queer and trans people, particularly queer and trans people who are interested in spiritual consciousness and spiritual guidance because of, historically the ways that, yeah, monotheistic faiths and traditional religious venues aren't really hospitable. So it's a really sweet space where I've actually just collected a bunch of readings and quotes and moments that have deeply shaped my consciousness, and we get to come together and kind of cultivate what queer spiritual consciousness looks like together. And that's some of my favorite work right now. Yeah, so it's cool. Yeah.
Wow. I hear the passion in you sharing it, and just, I mean, hearing about your journey and the place you've gotten to, both, like, I'm so happy about it. I feel elated for you. I feel elated about this work you're doing for and with the queer and trans communities. And it's like, I love that it's not just like operating at like we can be okay, but like we can have bliss, we can have joy, we can have
Yep.
this elation and this transformation and this it feels so profound to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's exactly what you said. That's exactly right. Because so much of my earlier years in college was we can survive. Like we could get by, right? And I was like, I think I had to have that epiphany outside of the university to be like, why is that all we seek? We deserve so much more. And why isn't anybody saying that, And so I really had to let go of just surviving or struggling or just getting by, because that is so much of the queer and trans life story, right? Is just struggling and surviving and getting by. And I think, it came out of just sheer exhaustion of going through that loop too many times and realizing, no, we deserve bliss. We deserve peace. We deserve ease. We deserve to experience joy. And we deserve to cultivate love. And I think then I took myself as the first test. Like, how do I do that? Because oh my God, I was not raised like this, right? I want to make that abundantly clear. I was raised in a home where you struggled and you survived and you suffered, right? And so it was a huge paradigm shift for me as well. And it takes a lot to buy into that and to believe you deserve better, right? But I think that's part of the fun of the work that I get to do. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, broadly speaking, for all of us as humans, we see joy as an extra, as a luxury, as a like as a privilege. And there's a sense of like it shouldn't be. It should be for everyone, right? It shouldn't be something
Yeah.
just reserved for few. And it shouldn't be seen as, I don't know, it's almost like we feel like it's a kind of hedonism to be happy, especially with so much strife and challenge in the world. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. That's why I made the Trans Joy workshop, which is specifically to address that for trans people. Obviously I do this work with anyone and everyone in my spiritual guidance practice. That's
Yeah.
one-on-one. And so if you're listening and you're not queer, it's totally okay. You can still
Okay.
reach out. You can still reach out. I think, this question exists for all of us, right? But for me, I obviously focus on and center the trans community in Trans Joy. And that workshop is specifically to address that, because the question that I get more than any is, how dare I pursue joy when someone else is suffering, when others are suffering, right? And I mean, go talk to anyone. Everyone holds the same question in their chest and their heart, right? There's very few people that realize that their joy is important and is necessary for their lives and their well-being, right? Except for usually like super elders who are like calm and kind of get it. It's usually like very, very few
Yeah.
people that know that. So yeah, I think for me that's the work, is bringing that discussion and that space and that awareness for folks to realize, particularly trans people of color. It's like, yes, but how you treat yourself, right? How you feel yourself is a part of the world, and the work that you do, right, is a part of absolutely liberation practice, right? If I, you know, am working overtime or helping people or volunteering or activism, and I'm, protesting all this stuff, but I hate myself, right? But I don't eat well, right? But I don't, see trees or birds or spend time with the earth. If I don't have a relationship with the seasons, yeah, yeah, that's not noble, And I think I've had that kind of awareness shift for myself, right, and realized that, I deserve joy. There's just so much of your life that will change after you were able to say that sentence, right?
I feel like you've, in some sense, given all of us like that little bit more permission, which we don't need, but to feel like we can claim and have joy in our lives. And I think, to come back to this kids or child-free decision, sometimes what we believe will bring us the most joy, it may not be what's expected of us, right? It may feel contrary to whether it's pursuing solo parenthood, whether it's a child-free path, maybe it's having children and doing that joyfully in spite of having experienced or been part of something else in your upbringing.
Right.
Um, it's okay to move towards what will bring you joy in this choice.
Yeah, absolutely. Hearing you use the word contrarian makes me think of, for me, having kids was contrarian, right? Like, for me to have children was the opposite of what I was supposed to do, right? It's like, if you're going to be gay and weird, then go be gay and weird in a corner and die. Do not make children, And it was like, no, I feel this. I feel this strongly. I feel this. And, me and my partner had our, moment, our spiritual awakening, and we're like, we're going to have this child. And like, for me, that was absolutely antithetical to how I was supposed to behave, right? So I think, yeah, the question is, yeah, one, recognizing that, but two, also, what does it mean to trust myself as I make these choices that are perhaps super, super opposite for what I was told I'm supposed to do? That's trust. That's spiritual growing up right there. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, I have two more questions for you. One of them is, the world out there. I mean, it's hectic, right? That's putting it mildly. And of course, specifically for those in the queer and trans communities. But I think what I hear from a lot of my clients is like, how can I consider or think about possibly having a child in light of everything that is happening, from climate change to our political landscape, like you name it. How do you think we can consider the broader world in the context of this decision, or the decision in the context of our broader world?
Yeah. It's a good question, and I almost want to say that when I was deciding and we were deciding to get pregnant the first time, we had to throw everything else outside of the window. And it had to become very internal, very, very internal, very personal choice, right? Because, the world, the world sucks. It will always suck. The world is the world, if we want to think of it in that dark, optic, right? But I think what's useful and important here, right, is that to have a child is to force us to hope and to believe, right, that a different world is possible, right? So for me, I come from a lot of gender theory, but most importantly, a lot of abolitionist theory, right, which is, obviously we've heard phrases of abolish this, abolish that, right? But the way that I understand abolition that's most sacred and supportive for me, right, is to nourish the future, right? And so if I want to nourish the future, if I actually want to create a different world, if I actually believe in a different world, what's a bigger declaration of my commitment to the next world than raising the next generation, right? And raising that next generation with different values, right? With queer consciousness, right? With trans freedom, right? Knowing my children can raise vegetables and take care of plants and to tend to the earth, et cetera, right? And so, yeah, I think the way that I see it, right, is that having a child is, a commitment to hope, right? I think one of the quotes that guides me best on this, right, is it's an indigenous saying, and it's, you do not inherit the world from your parents, you borrow it from your children. And that one did something to me. I was like, whoa. I was like, you're right, you're right. And so I think, it's really easy to turn on the news or to turn on your phone and see everything and never want to open your eyes again. Absolutely. Right. So my first advice is to turn off your TV and turn off your phone and go outside. That's my first advice. The second is, what does having a child, how does that force me to reconsider my relationship to Earth? Right. That's a very different question. And yeah, it's uncomfortable. It is challenging. It's terrifying. There's reasons that I want to put my head in the sand, many a time, but I think it's also, yeah, just a commitment to creating that different world that I know is possible, that's within us, that's in our bones, that's in our visions, right? And so I think that's the step.
Amazing. Okay, my very last question is, what do you love best about being a parent in your relationship with your child?
Actually, showing her the world, I think that I am blessed enough to live somewhere where there's more land than there is concrete. There's more mountains than there are cars, and that is such a blessing. And a lot of times I get the pull, from family, come back to California. They live in the cities. Come live in the cities, LA or San Francisco. And there's something so vivid and clear to me. Me and my partner live in this very small town in Colorado, and it's like we couldn't have imagined having a child unless we lived in this environment, right? So this land and this is what gave us the opportunity, or the vision was allowed to unfold because we're here. Because for me, having a child is showing them Earth, right? For me, that's so important, because I've realized that at one point I will die, and I will leave my kids and they will be alone, right? And so for me, the biggest question is, how can I offer them solace or guidance? How can I hold them when I'm not with them, right? And for me, it's going to be fostering a deep connection with this earth, so that they know this earth and know that the earth can hold them through whatever it is that they're going to experience, whatever trials they're going to face. And I think it's really important that they know that. And like, luckily, like I said, we live in, very, very remote terrain. We have mountains and lots of beautiful, gorgeous land for them to explore and to be able to come to, and to, bring whoever they are to those trees, to those mountains, those rivers, right? Me and my partner, the reason we sound and walk and talk like we do is because this earth has been able to take so much off of our shoulders and to let us be at ease, right? And in a world, in a society where everyone is running and late, and their Uber's waiting and their flight is delayed, right? I think we're lucky that we get to, see cows on our way to the library, right? So it's a very different life experience. So for me, one of the absolute favorite parts is, yeah, showing how beautiful Earth is to my kids, and hopefully allowing them to really get a solid relationship with Earth that will guide them as they grow. Yeah.
You have moved me immensely with that answer. Anybody watching the video will have seen the tears come. This has been such a beautiful conversation. I am
Yes.
just so delighted to have had it. It feels very profound. It feels, I mean, we have some fantastic folks coming to this podcast, but this one is just such a gift. And I know people are going to love everything you have shared with us. So tell us where we can find you, what we need to know, how we can like hook up to either work with you or learn about your work.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So yeah, the easiest way to find me is on Instagram, right? It's Dr. Shawndeez. So DrShawnDeez, Dr. Shawndeez. And yeah, like I said, I do hold groups, different groups for queer and trans people and community, but also spiritual guidance is my absolute favorite work, and that's one-on-one work with people. I work with anyone and everyone. Obviously, this has been very queer and trans leaning, but I do work with anyone and everyone. I do work with cisgender people. I do work with heterosexual people, people that basically feel one, me and want to work with me, feel drawn to that. But most importantly, it's the question of how to strengthen a spirit that perhaps feels weakened, right? To, actually embolden listening to our hearts as a valid form of life in this day and age, right? For me, that's, you know, that's the task, right? Is how to get more people leaning into their spirits, listening to their hearts, and to make that practical, right? For me, that was a lot of my research and dissertation, right? But now for me, the work is how do we actually help spiritual consciousness guide people in real lives and everyday, encounters. And that's the work that I do. So yeah, definitely hit me up, find me. Yeah.
All right. We will include all of the info, the links in the show notes of today's episode so people can easily find you. Thank you again for this wonderful conversation and for coming on to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Okay, now that we've wrapped up today's conversation, this is the part of the episode where I tell you that you need to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. And you really need to do that. And I'm going to tell you why. And that is because one of the big ways that people find and discover new podcasts like this one is through reviews. So if you yourself can go say what you loved about this podcast, why people who are on the fence should tune into the Kids Are Child-Free podcast, that's going to help other people who are also wondering, should I have kids or stay child-free, to discover us. Thank you in advance for doing so. I will be featuring some of the reviews in upcoming episodes, so maybe I'll share yours. You never know. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you back here soon for our next episode.